Welcome to Perspectives on Islam from a non-Muslim. My name is Elaine. And the video today, Muhammad was not black and he had many slaves. So many of these slides will be described in the present tense because slavery isn't over and the foundational doctrine of Islam is eternal. The Quran and Hadith, the example of Muhammad, are considered perfect and are the basis of Islam today, just as they were 14 centuries ago. So why am I making this video? Because slavery is as brutal as it ever was and is still happening. Here you see the example of a beautiful young Yazidi girl who was captured by jihadis and taken as a sex slave. She survived. Eventually, Nadia was able to escape and a book was written about her experience. In 2021, this courageous woman, who had already suffered so much, was denied permission to speak to a Canadian high school book club in a non-Islamic country because of Islamophobia fears. CNN captured live video of a slave market in Libya in 2017. Some of these men were sold for as little as $400. They filmed them being sold, and not without great risk to themselves for exposing a subject that is most often avoided, ignored, or treated only as a matter of history. Even though slavery has continued unabated for 14 centuries, it is rare that it is reported on, and the educational system of free countries is afraid to speak of it. So there's slavery in all of these sources, which serves as justification for the practice of slavery in Islam. The Quran and Sunnah are the foundation of Islam, but because Islam is dualistic, you may have been told that Muhammad freed slaves, but not told that he also bought, sold, traded, and kept slaves, and that in his many battles, captives were taken as booty and shared amongst his followers. So you see here the Quran, which most people are familiar with, the Sunnah, the Hadith, the traditions, the example of Muhammad. And to put them in context, you need to know the foundational knowledge of the life of Muhammad, which is here in Ibn Ishaq's book, written in the 8th century. So Muhammad took the best slaves for himself. He not only had many slaves, he had many wives, 13. And one of them was Sophia. So she was taken captive and then given to one of his followers, but it was realized pretty quickly how beautiful she was. He took her for his own wife that same night. And this is what happened to his husband, her husband. Torture him until you extract what he has. So he kindled a fire with flint and steel on his chest till he was nearly dead. Then the apostle, Muhammad, delivered him to Muhammad bin Masala, who struck his head off in revenge for his brother. So the previous slide was a hadith from the collection of Nasi. Now this is the same hadith, and it's in a collection by Dawood. So there are 6 collections of hadith that are considered the best, and they all have many hadith about slavery. From the book of Baya, which means loyalty, you can see that sometimes Muhammad had to buy his followers and they would pledge loyalty. So in Mecca, when Muhammad was seeking pledges, so that people would follow him, he took a pledge from a man, not realizing that he was a slave. So that meant he belonged to someone else. So Muhammad had to buy him. And after that, Muhammad always checked to see if the person was a slave before taking their pledge. He traded 2 black slaves for him. And likewise with women, it would be 2 female slaves for 1 male. At least 2 slaves for 1 was acceptable if it was a straight exchange, a hand-to-hand exchange. But as you see here, if it was a matter of credit, well, then it was a little different. So this is a mukataba. It's a contract. And a contract could be arranged for the slave to pay for his own freedom if he had the means, and he would first have to convert to Islam and then follow Sharia, which would include paying zakat as well as the slave price. Now, zakat is an Islamic tax. So the slave would not be free until the amount had been paid in full. And here's a bit more about zakat, is that as you can see, he would have to pay it. And one category for the expenditure of zakat is jihad, which is the very thing that had enslaved the captives to start with. So promises to slaves were broken. Here is a slave who had been promised freedom when the slaveholder died, but he was out of money. So Muhammad sold the slave for him and gave him the money instead. So freeing slaves was not a question of justice, and when it would benefit the owner in some way, not only money. For example, here a slave was freed on behalf of a deceased owner and a deceased parent in expectation that the parent would receive a heavenly reward. So slaves had no human rights, and this was not justice. This was an expectation of some good befalling the slaveholder for an act of charity. And this one is similar, but the slave owner herself left a will to emancipate a believing slave on her behalf. As before, the slave must have accepted Islam, and it is for the benefit of the slaveholder in the expectation of a heavenly reward. So not till the slaveholder had no further use for the slave was the slave to be freed. So it's not much of a sacrifice, really. So freeing slaves could also be a penalty against the owner for some wrongdoing. In this case, there was a follower who had broken the fast at Ramadan, and so he was punished by making him free a slave. And in this one, a slave had been promised freedom, but Muhammad called for the slave and sold him anyway, and the slave died the same year. Here we see slaves are bartered. There was relative value for slaves, and Muhammad paid 2 slaves for one in this case. Followers would ask Muhammad for advice about slaves, which one is the most valuable. So a slave's wealth belonged to him unless the master stipulates that it will belong to him. So there was no guarantee. It could be taken anytime. And while Muhammad was living amongst them, his followers sold their slave women and the mothers of their children, and didn't see anything wrong with that. So slaves are expected to tell the truth, but beaten anyway. And you can see here Ali, who was one of Muhammad's companions, said, "Women are plentiful. You can easily exchange one for another. Ask the slave girl, she will tell you the truth." So the apostle called for the slave girl, and Ali got up and gave her a violent beating anyway. Tell the apostle the truth. So Muhammad liked fair-skinned slaves. Then he could have intercourse with them at any time by virtue of them being his property. And his followers would put in orders for slaves. Sometimes this man was hoping for a slave woman from the Thaqif tribe because they were said to produce intelligent children. And raping captives was permitted. The booty must be fairly divided. There's no concern for impregnating the woman. So if she was already pregnant, then she should not be raped, but not for her sake, but because a Muslim should not mix his seed with that of a kafir, a non-believer. That's what a kafir is. So there were many battles, many captives, many slaves. And how many are we talking about? And how many are they divided amongst? Well, here at Khaybar, you can see that the slaves were divided amongst 1,400 men. The scale of conquest was enormous. At Khaybar, the companions numbered 1,400, but towards the end of his career as a jihadi, this is after the beginning of the Islamic calendar with the migration to Medina. After those 10 years, there were as many as 10,000 in a battle. It's estimated there were 100,000 that had converted by then. So in a 9-year period, Muhammad personally took part in 27 of those raids. There were 38 other battles and expeditions in the book I showed you at the beginning of Ishaq. So that's an average of one armed event every 6.5 weeks for the last 10 years of his life. And that's taking the lower number, because if you look on Wikipedia, work of Montgomery Watt and others, they show the battles as numbering 95 in that last 10 years. So Muhammad caused so much terror that some tribes submitted in fear for their lives. Because there was no battle at Fadak, all the spoils went to Muhammad. You can see here, God struck terror to the hearts of the men of Fadak when they heard what the apostle had done to the men of Khaybar. So at both Khaybar and Fadak, Muhammad established the dhimmis. Now, dhimmis were residents who would be permitted to live and work the land as second-class citizens, paying something called the jizya. It's like a protection money as high as 50% of their produce. And Muhammad had a revelation about this, that he and his followers were to fight those who did not believe in Allah in the last day, nor forbid that which had been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, in other words, following Sharia. And also Christians and Jews, fight them as well until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So according to the doctrine, conquered land belongs to Islam, and the dhimmis could be expelled at any time, and eventually they were all expelled from their homes on the entire Arabian Peninsula. So his followers were promised paradise and booties as incentives to jihad. In fact, Muhammad said he would like to be martyred in Allah's cause, be resurrected and martyred again and again. But that didn't turn out so well for this slave. Now, this slave must have first converted to Islam, and then second, he would have to pay the zakat, the Islamic tax. And then 3, he took part in Muhammad's jihad. But even after all that, because he had taken a cloak from the booty before it was divided, Muhammad declared that his destination would be hell. So Muhammad wasn't black. He was a very light-skinned Arab of the Quraysh tribe, and many hadith describe the whiteness of Muhammad's leg, thigh, shanks, forearms, armpits, abdomen, cheeks, complexion, and his elegant white color, neither very white nor tawny. Now, in the early 19th century, the Nation of Islam in the US converted many people by telling them that Islam is the natural religion of Black people. And as you can see, there's no reason to believe that. Color has never been a barrier to who can be enslaved. So after conquering the Arabian Peninsula, Islam spread across all of the Mediterranean into the Baltic states and Spain, also the Black Sea, Poland, and Russia. Islamic slave traders captured and sold not only Africans, but also millions of white Europeans from as far north as Ireland and even Iceland. You see the coast of Iceland in this image here. And many millions died en route before they even reached the slave markets of Algiers and Constantinople during the Ottoman Empire. The Barbary pirates were also jihadis taking captives by sea and demanding ransom or enslaving their victims. This is a letter that was written by a person who was taken as a slave from Iceland. He said, "There is a great difference between masters. Some slaves get good, gentle, or in between masters, but some unfortunates find themselves with savage, cruel, hard-hearted tyrants who never stop treating them badly and who force them to labor and toil with scanty clothing, little food, bound in iron fetters from morning to night." So jihadi slave raids by the Tatars alone into Poland, Ukraine, and Russia between the 15th and 17th centuries numbered over 3 million, and many died. So often in chains, this is a quotation here, often in chains, captives were marched to the slave markets. The old and infirm who will not fetch much at a sale are given up to the Tartar youths, either to be stoned or thrown into the sea, or to be killed by any sort of death they might please. So this is the Algiers slave market in 1684. But we began this video in the 21st century, and we'll go back to it now. So here you see, whether it's Zimbabwe, the UK, online, in Libya or Kuwait, human beings are still being captured and then sold as slaves in Islamic states such as Libya, Yemen, Iraq, and Kuwait. So even though Saudi Arabia finally abolished slavery in their civil law in 1962 and Oman in 1970, the doctrine hasn't changed, and neither has the practice. So decades later, many migrant workers from Islamic and non-Islamic countries, such as India, describe exploitation reaching slavery-like conditions. And you can see this here. You can order up a migrant worker online. So this woman here, she asked a Saudi mufti and several Kuwait religious scholars and experts, who said that for the average good religious man, the only way to avoid forbidden relations with women is to purchase slave girls. She says that she hopes such a law will be legislated because we don't want our children to fall into the sin of fornication. So slavery is thriving in almost every country. Here's another scene of a captive woman sold in Nigeria, as you see below here. Estimates put the number of enslaved people in Nigeria at 130,000. She was born into a slave family. And here is a slave market in Syria in 2014, 2022, and Iraq. So you see here also a price list, which is a way to help finance the jihad. The market was dropping, so they vowed to execute anyone who violated the price control. So I hope you've taken a little bit from this video, and I thank you very much for watching it. The world has not progressed. Today, slavery and slave markets are active in many parts of the world. Justification can be found in the foundational doctrine of Islam, the Sunnah of Mohammed. It says in the Hadith, the best talk is Allah's book, the Quran, and the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. So I thank you for your attention. Please like and especially share this video and subscribe. We need more people talking about this. It hasn't gone away. Links below. Thank you.